Welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wondered about near-death experiences, if they're real and what in the world do they mean, or if there's proof of life after life, then do we have the show for you. Today, I'll be talking with Dr. Raymond Moody live, the world's foremost authority on near-death experiences, who even coined the term about all things NDE and what they mean for you. Plus, we'll talk about his book, God is Bigger Than the Bible. So welcome back to the show, Raymond. Are you ready to shine?
Well, I don't know if I can shine or not, but I sure am having a great time. So just thanks so much for having me on the program.
You are most welcome, and a mighty woo-hoo. So before we dive right into things, and I do have a special guest waiting off camera, but before we get there to that very, very special guest, Raymond, is there life after life?
Well, I tell you the truth, I don't think of myself as an authority. I realize as a professor of epistemology and logic the difficulties in making inferences about this. And so I understand all those logical difficulties, and would not try to persuade anybody else. Okay. But what I can say is
what have you seen? Sorry. What have you seen from near-death experiences, though?
Well, that after 50 plus years of talking with people who've had these incredible experiences when they come back from the verge of death and the great, the similar patterns and so on, I give up. I mean, to my utter astonishment, I gather there is an afterlife. Everybody has to come to their own understanding on that. And I am a skeptic, Michael, in the actual philosophical sense of the word. Now, the Pyrrho was the Greek philosopher who, about 30 years after the death of Aristotle, formulated the skeptical philosophy. And the idea was that Aristotle had formulated logic, but the skeptics
hold
were
on, hold on,
logic,
one second,
yeah.
Raymond. There is what is going on? What in the world is?
We have an expert on life before life.
We have an expert on life before life here. We have an absolute expert on life before life.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
And I think she wants to tell us about it.
Yeah, hey, beautiful. Oh, sweet. Hey, darling.
This is Hannah Bear, and she's been in this life, I know, for 10 months. And
Correct.
My guess is that what you've learned from all of these experiences of near-death experiences that you've learned about from people, that she chose to come here, didn't she?
That's what I gather from, listening also to my own kids who, I did not talk to them about this stuff. They found out about it by looking me up on the internet. But, both of these kids that we adopted at birth have subsequently said things to us that, obviously they came here from somewhere else, and
what have they told you?
Well, for example, Carter, when he was 5 years old, we adopted him at birth. But when he was about 5, he and I were watching TV one evening, but I was flipping through the channels. We came across what turned out to be the National Geographic Channel. But as I did, Carter became very animated. Dad, that's my village. What? Went back to it. It was a documentary about village life in China.
Wow.
Carter was obvious. He obviously saw I was perplexed. What? And as though to orient me, said, yeah, Dad, before I came to you and Mommy, I was with my other mommy and daddy and brothers and sisters in China. And, again, I was uncomprehending. And then to orient me, and he said, yeah. And then I was up in the trees looking at you and Mommy lying in the grass. And I knew exactly what he was talking about, because we were, Cheryl and I were in Greece, and we were exhausted from our plane flight. And we were
Yeah.
at this remote location, an archaeological site, and the attendant said, could tell we were exhausted. Just go lie down in the grass over there and take a nap. There were these big trees all around, and
Yeah.
we were talking about adopting a baby. So,
Wow.
I mean, it's just, uh, you know,
What do you
it's,
think of that, Hannah Bear?
and so, you know, I just, it's still very counterintuitive to me, Michael, that there could be an afterlife. I think when I was a kid, I was not exposed to any religion per se,
Yeah.
except it's, I mean, it wasn't just a thing of going to religious stuff. Plus I was interested in astronomy. Okay.
Yeah.
And my dad was having come back from the military, I'm sure, after being a medic in the Pacific Theater, just must have been very cynical. But for all in all, I did not have any notion of this afterlife thing. So it's still very.
How did that start? How did it begin? What, because you, to me, are, forgive me for this term, the father of NDEs. You're literally,
Well,
quite literally. How did this start for you? And then when did you realize, I need to investigate this? I need to learn about this. I need to know what the heck is going on.
yeah, okay. Well, that to me, the father of this is Plato. And this is what happened, Michael. Astronomy was my thing from the time I was 7. Okay. I went to UVA when I was 18, intending to be an astronomy major and then go get my PhD in astronomy. And so
Yeah.
went there, but I had, been interested in philosophy in high school, but took a philosophy course my first semester, and
Yeah.
immediately, just the first few days, got hooked on this Plato guy in reading the Republic. I mean, immediately swept up on that and the book, and immediately decided, hey, I'm going to be a philosophy major, right? So, just following the course of that amazing book down to the end of it, and a dramatic culmination in this guy's experience when he was bleed dead in battle, and uh, revived on the funeral, and at his funeral, to talk with his colleagues or the other soldiers about his getting out of his body and going through a passageway into another world. And to me, what blew my mind about it was that Plato obviously took this seriously, just like, oh, my previous concept of an afterlife had come from New Yorker cartoons in my dad's office, where it showed like clouds and angels and stuff, and from a Jack Benny movie that
Yeah.
where my Aunt Edna took me, where there was again this afterlife thing, but I thought it was a comic premise. But when I realized that Plato took this seriously, that woke me up that, wow, that's where I got interested in it.
So did you start interviewing people, or how did you first, because you've spoken to so many people, maybe more than anybody else on earth, who've had near-death experiences, and you've also disappeared off the screen, which could be a near-death experience of Raymond. Where are you, Raymond?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, but I can't see you now.
See, Jeremy, I think.
All right.
Bedtime's in 8 minutes.
All right. So we're back. So we've got Raymond is coming back on camera in a second. We've got baby Hannah here, and we can show me full screen. Baby Hannah is saying bedtime is in less than 8 minutes. Baby Hannah's been doing something very interesting lately. Raymond, baby Hannah has been doing something interesting. So she lost lost her twin sister in utero last year. So she's a twin.
Oh, I remember. Yeah.
And she's been waking up in the morning, sitting upright in bed, and we've woken up or come into the bedroom if we had snuck out of the room early to find her sitting, looking up and having a conversation.
Yes. You know, I just hear this things all the time, Michael. I lived in Charlottesville in the 80s. I
Yep.
lived in neighborhoods where it was not this kind of interest. I remember one place across the street lived a professor of economics. Over there lived an accountant. Next door lived a guy who owned a car dealership. I mean, this was not the kind of neighborhood where people with this kind of interest lived. But during that time, it was like not one, not two, but several people just in the neighborhood came and said, "Oh, what do I think about, little Andrew or 4 or 5, these young kids who just began to talk about putative other lives." And of course, what the parents were, the reason the parents brought them was they were thinking, there might be something wrong, right? That was the drift. Like, Raymond, what do you think about this kid? Is there anything wrong with him because he's talking that way? That's how it was generally presented. And I talked to him, and no, I mean, you can't say, but I was not awake at that time to this reincarnation thing. So I just, you know, Michael, one thing that I just sort of realized to say about myself that you've provoked here is that I am curious about so many things that some things just swamp other things. I mean, it's like when back in the 80s, I'm thinking when I just spontaneously heard a bunch, six, maybe 5, 6 kids brought to me because they, thinking about past lives. Well, that was interesting, but there were so many other interesting things at that time that I was swamped. Like the specific thing was homicide cases. I just loved forensic psychiatry, and I've talked to maybe 3 to maybe as many as 400 people who committed homicides, mainly these terrible, gosh awful National Enquirer kinds of things. So you see what I mean? It's like, as you can know too, is there are so many absolutely fascinating things in life that you have to kind of specialize.
So let's talk about some of this, and we'll go for short answers because I want to kind of snip it here, snip it there, snip it in the next place. First off, is there a consistency among the stories? I'm putting them in quotes. The stories of people who've had near-death experiences.
Yeah, one of the most striking things that I quickly realized when I started talking to people who've had this experience back in 1965 was the first living person I talked to, Dr. George Ritchie. And then a string of them while I was still, as an undergraduate, I got my PhD in philosophy. Then as philosophy professor, began to hear this from my students and my colleagues. Then went to medical school. It gradually accumulated, but very quickly you see that this is not something idiosyncratic, that this is a patterned phenomenon. And that what you quickly see is that the typical story is people say that they come close to death, and from whatever point, oh, this is death, that, I'm dying. And a very typical thing they say is they become aware of a passageway of some sort. And that they go through that passageway and come out on the other side into an incredibly brilliant, warm, loving, comforting light that no matter how many languages they speak, no matter how articulate they are, they say, there aren't any words for this. But the words they have to they say I have to just come up with words that seem to fit, but and it's like it's very continuous. Like people tend to say that, well, I saw relatives or friends of mine who had passed away, not in the physical form exactly, but you recognize them from the memories and the
Mhm.
feelings. Then you and they say that everything else kind of stands still and disappears, and you're surrounded by everything you've ever done in a holographic panorama, which is timeless. You're not in time anymore. And you can see everything you've ever done, but not just from the perspective you did when you did it, but also from the perspective of those of whom you've interacted. So if you see yourself doing something, you know, mean to somebody else, which
Mhm.
fortunately I never had, just kidding, which of course everybody has, right? That then you feel directly the hurt that you brought about and that other people.
Yeah.
Or if you see yourself doing a kind-hearted action, similarly, you feel the good feelings. Very often people are accompanying this panorama by they call it, say, Christ or God or whatever, uh, an angel. The
Yeah.
description is universal. That people say there is no real way to express it, but that although there are no words, it's like the question that this sort of being sees everything you've ever done, and yet still there's this love and compassion. And the question is, can you show that love and compassion? Everybody says, no matter what they were chasing, they say,
Yeah.
when you see this life review, it's like, what have you done with your life to how have you learned to love? Is something like they try to say it.
Thank you. So a few questions from that. First off, forgive me for asking, but if people are seeing where they've hurt others, and there probably is, and Ian just asked this question, there probably is no one here. It's part of the human experience. We've stepped on other people accidentally or not
Yeah,
so accidentally. But
that's right.
is there a hell? Is there shame? Is there judgment? Is there some sort of fire or crucible that we're going to go with because of how we lived or didn't live our lives?
Well, this is even though, Michael, I worked in a maximum security unit for the criminally insane. Um, I have never met any of the great villains of history. The people I encountered were mostly psychotic, right? And it was not a rational act. These were insanity cases, right? But I've never seen any of the great monsters of history, right?
Yeah.
But it would be this kind of thinking would be off the charts, right? I mean, just what do you say about somebody who mass murderers and of the great mass murderers of history? So I just can't, that's beyond my. All I can say is the folks I've talked with over the years who fall within the median range, I guess, of sinfulness, which I am, along with, I guess, most of us. It's there. They say that even though they often say, well, I was very judgmental about what I saw there, but this being of compassion I was with did not see it that way, but rather was expressed out as sort of a learning experience or something like that. And and then also, Michael, people say, the wonderful George Ritchie, the greatest person I ever knew, and the first living person I heard this from. In 1977 or so, I was telling, it's the way he put it is, Raymond, he said, this experience makes your humanity even more of a burden in a way, where you see this being of complete love. And what he was getting at, to make it blunt, is let's face it, it's hard to get through the average day without wanting to choke at least one person. And even after you see this vision of love, it's very difficult to put that into practice. You still file the handle or whatever. But people do get better. I have seen that through decades of knowing people.
What happens to one? What is the transformation that occurs in one after an NDE, after near death experience? And is that, do you think, hardwired or baked into the universe or consciousness for a reason?
All right. Yeah. Okay. And well, the effects on people are this. You and I both know most people are chasing something. That was a big discovery to me as a psychiatry resident. All these people are chasing something. I say, oh, this guy's chasing power, which is such a laugh if you think about it. This guy's chasing fame, which is so ridiculous, or or money, which I wish I'd chased that. At age 78, I wish I'd chased that some, but it's not disdain. It's just that it's knowledge is so much more fascinating, right? So anyway, all these people chasing things. And then I realized that on the prompting of my supervisor, that Dr. Buckman, that I am chasing, knowledge, right? But whatever people are chasing, they say that in this experience of their life review, that what this is all about is love. That's what the framework we're in is set up to promote. And also that there's a great deal of flexibility and understanding that there will be flubs and so along and such along the way. And then, Michael, as to your very pregnant question about what I think all this signifies is, to the whole idea of life after death is, and that what is it that lives after death, right? Well, Pythagoras came up with the immaterial immortal soul, which was passed on to Plato and then taken up by the Christians, but in their because of Plato's Phaedo, the Christians made that their theology of the afterlife. So then it gets transmitted on, and then you could go to the stake, I reckon, for disagreeing with that one. But then things loosen up a little bit, right in the 1500s. Then you have Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes say, well, what does that mean anyway? I mean, if you think about it really rigorously, the whole idea of an immaterial substance like the soul, that's just means nothing. And so then they get desperate. Well, how are we going to fill that in? Locke, who had to do with our Constitution, he says, well, our self is made of a consciousness, basically, and our memories and all constitute the self. And then David Hume, one of my great favorites of history, he comes along and say, well, when I look inside of myself, I don't see any substrate or there's nothing permanent there. It's always just an impression of the moment passing by. And that's kind of this modern view of the self as just an illusion or whatever, right? And who is to pontificate about that one? But where I, Raymond Moody, have come to is I think, Michael, that this thing we're in is the movies. And I'm serious about
Yes,
this,
I am
that
too.
consciousness is narrative directed. Think of it. Whenever anything new happens to you, what does your mind do? It folds it into your continuing life story. So what are you but your story? And so the possibilities from there are just enormous.
So
And
how much then are we, if forgive me, how much are we in a co-creative process
yeah,
of this story as a partial narrator of it?
I think that is it's very hard to express. I think the first the first problem with it, Michael, is a
Yeah.
conceptual one. Is because what Raymond Moody is saying here, if you think about it, is that what I'm doing is I'm taking one aspect of the human experience, namely theater, right?
Mm.
And I'm projecting that out there as a model of the whole. And
Yeah.
that's a simple logical fallacy, one of the first that Aristotle identified, of taking a metaphor for the literal reality, and that would be a fallacy. However, I think it came about the other way around. That is, that in what 700 BC, somewhat around there, they had this harvest festival there in Athens. It had been traditional, and they had a chorus that sang these old stories, right? But for reasons unknown, this one guy, Thespis, stepped forward from the chorus, spoke his own lines. It created a sensation. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, what are these people all about? Competition is that's what that whole society is about. The athlete, the Olympics, right? So let's have a contest, the Pisistratus says. Who can write the best one of these? First winner, Aeschylus. Second, then Sophocles, then Euripides. 50 years it took for theater to be a profession. So what that means to me is these guys who were very thoughtful, wise people, Aeschylus and such, they had realized the faculty of the part of life that I saw in a year of geriatric psychiatry I did as the VIP doctor. Because see, in a small town, the chief of police and the mayor and the town celebrities, the older folks, they can't go to the mental health clinic to be seen at the front door like the rest of us peons, right? They got, rightly, it's a kindness to sneak them in the back. So for a year, since I was older and had written the book, I was it. So all these great people I talked to, well-known people, it really very reflective, very, older folks constantly I heard, Raymond, the older I get, the more when I look back at my life, it seems to me like it's been a story or a play or a drama or a movie, or they would use different words, but I think that's what it's all about, that's intuition is right, and that this is story is what this is about.
Thank you, Raymond. From the people you've spoken to who've had near-death experiences, have you spoken to many who have had a counsel, for instance, or someone or something that they meet with before maybe they even came here that set their story in motion? So speaking for myself, both from my automatic writing I've done and from past life regressions, I met before a council and I said, give me the works. They said, you're not ready for it, Michael. And I said, give me the works. And I was sent here to learn certain things based on what I asked for before I came.
Yeah. Now, my mind is scanning, some thousands of, I can't remember, I've heard so many people with their near-death experiences. That particular pattern doesn't come immediately to mind, Michael. However, that doesn't mean it's not there. But what comes to my mind was my daughter, Carol Ann, who is Native American Blackfeet Indian. Okay, and this is a long story, but in early 80s, 1981, 82, I had two sons uh, and biological sons. And they were, 12 or so, 8 at that time. And I would just love them. But, my wife had had difficulties, pregnancy, no more. But I had always wanted a daughter. So I had this fantasy. It really was. I didn't set it up as a prayer. But it's very heartfelt. Wouldn't it be nice? I was sitting on the porch swing the spring. Wouldn't it be nice to adopt a Native American daughter? I have no idea where it came from. I just really, but I dwelt on it. That was say 81, 82. Flash forward in the year 2000. It happened without me putting anything else into it. I mean, and this is what happened. In about 1996, I'd been in New Mexico at a conference where the to ask your question, you had to go up to a microphone in the center aisle. And that is not a nice thing for many Native Americans. It's not the style. So sitting there, I was getting ready to lecture myself, but the previous lecturer was up there, right? And so he asked for questions. Then this wonderful woman, Christine, as we met next to us, like she was just obviously wanting to ask her question. But so I took her, my wife, prodded me. So I took, so I took Christine by the arm, led her around, let her ask a question. Right. So then we had a nice, how are you? It's a really nice person. Okay. That was 96. Now in 1998, we adopted our wonderful son, Carter. Okay. Who's now 24. Okay. Then in 2000, I was just sitting in, living in just happily with our new son. Phone rang. It was Christine. Oh, how are you? How are you? Oh, geez. And I said, oh, we're doing great. We've adopted a baby. Whereupon Christine said, oh, I wish so much I had known you were looking because on the reservation, I work in the hospital and I'm the first person who is notified when we have a situation where we need, a adoptive parents. By all means, I'd love a daughter. Just a few weeks later, your daughter's on the way. So there is my daughter, Carol Ann, who, so immediately, we started doing these long walks. She loves that. So when she was 9 years old, walking around, and I never told her about any of this. It's like we don't we don't talk about life after death in my family. We talk about just what's on TV, what's for dinner. I mean, this is not so, but at age 9, on our walk, Caroline, there was this old wooden bridge. She loved to sit there. So this one day, I don't like this place. And it was obvious that she was talking about the world. So this thing about being a psychiatrist, you really do get to the habit of where you don't react. I mean, and that's terrible sometimes, but it's a habit. So there she was. Uh, I don't like this place, and so but she could tell I was stunned. Well, what? And she said, "Yeah." She said, when you die, you just go up and you be with God, and He holds you up there till all the people you've known while you've alive have died, and then He sends you back as another person. And I said, well, what makes you think that? I just know in my mind. And I was with God, and God pointed you out to me. And He said, you got to go down to be His daughter. And I said, well, how did you feel about that? Oh, I didn't want to do it. I wanted to stay with my Gotti, but just interesting this. But He pushed me down to be your daughter. And I said, well, are you glad you came anyway? Oh, yeah, sure. So, and it's been quite a fascinating experience, Michael, as you can imagine, to raise a Native American daughter. For example, what do you do about history? When she learned how to read before she went to school, we don't know exactly how to do it, how she did it, but she started reading all these books on Pocahontas. And then one day looked at my wife and me like this and said, were your people English? And whoa, and so, well,
Wow.
yeah, now not only, get this, not only that we have to say, yeah, they were English, but Cheryl had to say, well, yeah, not only were they English, but they were the English, because her folks came into Virginia on that initial raiding party that got into trouble. So see what I mean? It's like this is at a certain point in life, you see that this is not exactly how the the common sense view of reality um, pictures
I
them.
want I want the uncommon sense. So I think where I want to go is because you've heard so many near-death experience, so many stories, you've spoken to so many people. Forgive me, I have no other way to put this. What is your woo, what do you guess you're going to find on the other side? And are you scared of death?
Michael, um, no, and number one, about the first, what do I think I'm going to find on the other side? Well, I realized that very early on, talking to people who've had this, experience to tell of, that what it really precludes is that you can't really imagine what it's like, really, because the words fail, right? So I've always been content with that, right? I mean, it's just to me, I'm curious, but I also think it will be that the words somehow do pertain to the experience, even though the experience is ineffable. The reason is that the fact that the words are so commonly assigned all over the word mean that somehow those words correspond in some way to the experience. That much I accept. So that much I expect, but I think also that that really I just don't know. It's like you, but I'm not in a hurry to find out because I'm confident that it will be something like that. But see, what this does even more to me is it focuses on, wow, what an amazing experience this thing we're in is. I mean, holy mackerel. Listen, I am not a religious person. I'm not preachy, but well, you gotta hand it to God. I mean, not he's the projectionist, the playwright, the editor, the I mean everything it was.
So if we go to I'm gonna use some PC culture and I think Rue in a minute here is gonna need me to either pick him up so he can sit with me or go to bed. We are going to see it's past his bedtime, so he's getting a little twitchy now. The movie now many years ago, geez, it used to seem like it was so modern and new. The Matrix
Yeah,
with
yeah,
Keanu Reeves. There was the architect in it.
yeah.
And if there is an architect of this world,
Hmm.
what is the it's a play, but for a purpose.
Yeah,
Your daughter chose you, saw
yeah,
you. God may have pushed her down, but there is a reason for
yeah,
all of this. What do you
yeah.
see is the reason from the architect, so to speak?
Okay, now, Michael, first of all, I want to make folks realize I don't know, right? I'm not preaching and I'm not trying to persuade anybody.
No,
Where I have
I
come
want
with,
your experience.
yeah,
Yes, from
this is what is it. As far as I can see into it, I can't see the whole big system, but I can see it up to a certain point, and that is that because the consciousness we're in is narrative consciousness. That is why I gather David Hume, the great skeptic, said that he was totally dismissive of the notion of an afterlife, except he said the only point of view about the afterlife that I think a philosophical person could entertain would be reincarnation. And what he didn't say, but what I gathered that means is that he was a great historian, right? So he was aware of the essential role in human affairs of narrative. That's what it's really all about, is because your life is a story. That's how you put yourself together as a story. There's cinematographers have a principle they call the Kulikov effect. I think the name is. And the idea is if you just take any two random images, say this box and this
Yep.
pair of eyeglasses, and you
Yep.
present those two images to people just randomly in order, the mind automatically starts weaving a story to connect the two. That's just how we are. And then in the end, it's like the story element comes in because of this fact. Now, just take a second to think about it. We can't logically infer yet from information about near death experiences that therefore there is an afterlife. However, we can make for sure one absolutely astonishing inference, Michael. For sure, even with just what we know about these life reviews that people have. Okay, so what happens is you get to the end of your life, time seems to stand still. Everything you've done is kind of broken up in individual pieces that are projected around you in a kind of hologram instantly. And you re-witness all of these things from other people's point of view. So to what that the implication now of it is, if you think about it, at least for some of us, life is a two-phase process. You see it forward as the actor or protagonist. Then time stands still. There's a 180-degree turnaround. And you witness the same action from the point of view of the other people. To me, that is phenomenal. And we cannot say that for sure.
So it's interesting. Years ago, I got a couple master's degrees at the same time, and part of what helped me do that was you would go to class, you get out of class. Please, dear Michael, reread your notes before you go any further, because that anchors things in. If this is a world that is a teaching experience to help us grow, expand consciousness, whatever that means, what you're describing there is the perfect tool to do that.
Yeah. And also people say that, in these life reviews, that what this being is really interested in predominant is the love, right? That's the theme. However, they say in addition, in which scenes occur in which they've been learning something, that this being is kind of slows down and focuses on it. And although there are no words, the thought comes. Something to the effect, and many people have said this, that the thought comes, that's very interesting. And even when you come over here permanently, that process will go on. And George Ritchie, among others, said, this process of learning, I gather, goes on quite literally for eternity. And some people who have these extremely lengthy cardiac arrests even go so far to say that they become aware of an entire dimension of existence that you could characterize as institution of higher learning. People say they just see vast, you can't even describe it, but people say you try to combine Caltech and MIT and Harvard and Yale and Princeton and all of them together. You can't even squunch it into this. It's unimaginable. But it's fairly common thing people say who have these extremely lengthy cardiac arrests.
It's the most interesting. We're going to open it up in just a couple minutes to some questions here. What is the most interesting thing? I know there's too many. It's sort of like me. I've had over 2,000 shows, and to say, what's your favorite show? I'm like, I don't know. I'm very present, so I'll go with this one, and then I'll go with the next one and the next
Yeah,
one.
I got
But
you.
it is there one thing, one story, one experience you heard of that just sticks in your mind, or you keep coming back to and keep coming back to again?
Well, George Ritchie's story, because he was the first living person I heard it from, because he was such a terrific person, and because of something that happened later in connection with it, Michael. And this would explain why, maybe, I mean, that's what I have to say. Okay, that was, yeah. And this was the feature that accounts for that. First of all, I met George Ritchie in Charlottesville, Virginia, when I was an undergraduate philosophy student. Okay. And I was from Macon, from Porterdale, Georgia, ultimately. Okay. And my mom and dad are from Porterdale, Georgia. Okay. That's what we need to have as background. Okay. And George was from Richmond, Virginia. Okay. And George's story that I heard him tell took place in December 1943 when he was a recruit into the Army, age 20, having already graduated from college. George was just really brilliant. Okay, but 20 years old, he graduated with honors from college and a high school track star. I mean, just but George uh, volunteered to go into the Army and was doing his basic training at Camp Barkley, Texas, and developed double lobar pneumonia and had this experience in December 23rd of 4th, I believe it was, 1943. Okay, now that's what got me on this track. It was just like, oh, amazing. And just so, I mean, I knew George was real. You just felt the presence of the divine. I mean, just that night, I was, holy mackerel. So then I heard a few more. Anyway, then that was 1965. Okay. In 1975, 10 years later, um, I, I, I my book Life After Life was getting to be ready to be published. I'd actually written it in 74. It took a year for the publisher to do all those things. Then it was published in November of 75. But just as it was going to press, I called George Ritchie and asked him if I could dedicate the book to him. But my point is that's the only contact I had with George all those years. Okay, was that one phone call. Okay, now, then the book was published in November of 75. I graduated from medical school in January of 76. And I was in Georgia doing my medical school, but I decided to go back to Charlottesville to do my residency in psychiatry. So in March of 1976, my wife and I flew back to Charlottesville from Georgia. And I just going through town, I called Dr. Ritchie just to say hello. He's a very nice guy. Oh, please come and have dinner. My wife and I had dinner with him and his wife. And so it's very nice. So then next day we flew back to Macon, Georgia, where my parents live, and they were taking care of our kids. My parents were okay. So I just mentioned to casually to my dad that this night before I'd been with this Dr. George Ritchie, who I first person I'd heard, living person I'd heard this from. And I can tell you exactly what Dad said, Michael, because I knew by that time from my study of psychiatry that what you call telegraphic speech, where somebody sounds like they're just a telegram, that's a sign of anxiety. So this is exactly what my dad said. And when I mentioned George Ritchie, he said, huh, By then, my dad had heard a tape of Dr. Ritchie's experience. Okay, he had heard this tape of Dr. Ritchie talking about this. So my dad said, huh, George Ritchie, Camp Barkley, Texas, December 1943. That's very interesting. You know, I was there, and so were you. And what had happened was my dad and mom had moved to Camp Barkley, Texas in early September 1943 so that my dad could go to officers candidate school. I was conceived in late September 1943. Mom and George's experience was, I think, December 24th or 23rd, 1943. Mom and dad moved away from Camp Barkley, Texas on December 29th, 1943. So I was there in utero. Where,
Booga
so
booga.
you can see why I have to say, that's the one I would nominate from, but I've heard many others like it as well. Yeah.
Thank you. And I want to go to some questions from the audience now, but there are no coincidences. There's this amazing, to me, there's this amazing fabric that sews us all together and sews all these
That's right.
experiences together. So
Exactly right.
let's go to a few questions from the audience here, and thank you, everyone. We'll go to from Dark Skies. How soon after passing does the transition seem to occur? And this is your best extrapolation on all of these,
Yeah.
but what do you guess?
Yeah, well, I think that's a tricky question for this reason, is that time dissolves as soon as you're into this light. See, and therefore it's just very difficult for people to say. But where I have definitely seen cases in my clinical practice where the even though it maybe doesn't make sense in ordinary language, that the only way you can describe it is that you kind of see people with, well, one man who saw it said, he used the phrase, he said he said, my wife already had one foot on the other side, was the way he tried it. And I know exactly what that means. It's like, there is this phase, and even in the last few days where people are in the last hours of death and so on, how people are not in time anymore as we appreciate it. And so, and
It's
it would
interesting. Their
make,
language has changed.
that's right. That's right. And so I would say that that time just becomes, you know, it's time is a fiction of our minds, really. I mean, that sounds rather psychotic, but that's what I think the great philosophical thinkers have come up with. And Kant, for example, and I mean, I think it is. It's my dear wife is very brilliant, and Cheryl is totally non-intellectual, thank God, right? She was into fashion, art school, yeah, just a great, dear, wonderful, great, brilliant person, and into fashion, right? So thank God for me, she's not into intellectual things like philosophy. So about 3, 4 years ago, Cheryl was standing in the living room, and I saw her with that wonderful look on her face she has sometimes, and she said, "Time is unreal." And that's something I'm studying philosophy. I sort of realized as a kid there's something fishy about that. But to see somebody who's so involved in the actual vibrant world like Cheryl, it as you grow older, it just dawns on you there's something wrong about this whole notion.
Well,
And
to me,
Aristotle said it beautifully. Yeah, I mean,
to me, it's a. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, Aristotle said such great things. So maybe just this is an interesting thought. Don't want to dwell on Aristotle, but he said, "What an amazing thing time is." He said, " consists of past, present, and future." He said the past doesn't exist. He said, there's no such thing as the future, and you can't even hold on to the present. I mean, what is it? So it's not as clear as common sense makes it seem. So I think
To
that's
me, a
the
lot of
answer
this.
ultimately to your question. Yeah.
Thank you. To me, it seems like it's it's all a make-believe construct that's important. If we go back to that theater metaphor, we
Mhm.
need a stage, we need wings, we need a left wing and a right wing, or we're
That's right.
completely lost. We need a curtain up and a curtain down, or there's no arc, there's no performance. So in order for
That's right.
us to have a story in
Yeah.
this existence, we have to all come to a collective amnesic state that time is real, or else the
That's
story is all
exactly right.
gobbledygook.
That certain sort of presuppositions have to be unchallenged. I mean, most of them can be challenged for certain reasons. People get psychotic or whatever, but that by and large, these background assumptions have to be there just to make the story convincing.
It's fascinating that you said this because you've worked with such interesting, we'll use that term, psychotic criminals.
Mhm.
Is it that the psychotic are psychotic, or are they no longer seeing the underpinnings of this world and seeing the world a different way?
It was really strange to me. And Michael, honest to goodness, and I just don't know. I've wanted to solve that question, and I was so curious about, these bizarre homicides. But what I finally realized is those people are psychotic, and insanity. Really, they just are unable to appreciate the difference
Yeah.
between right and wrong, and they're really, really bizarre things. And so, in that process, number one, I spoke English with the Southern accent, and my brother and my uncle were very famous in law enforcement throughout the state. And cops rightfully, I mean, they're kind of suspicious of these, you know, psychiatrists. I mean, it goes with and they need to be, right? And so, but I was, this guy over at, and he Millishield, his Fairley is his uncle, and Randy is his brothers. So I was all right. And so I'd go around the state, and then the judges would kind of, form friendships. And then when the 55-year-old deacon of the church, right, who was the pillar of the community, and who, as the homicide detective who arrested him, told me that when he went into the guy's office, there was the picture of him in the high school football team when at 17, 18, complete with the football where he had made that pass. That people are still talking about almost 40 years later, right? And so this guy had hired his sociopath brother to do in his inconvenient girlfriend. All right. So the judge said, well, Raymond, it's like, would you talk to him? I mean, it's like, I'm just friend. The judge was thinking, I'd known him all my life, as the deacon of the church. And the judge was thinking, it must be a screw loose somewhere, right? So, and I would get cases like that too. A lot of people that the judges want me to evaluate who were not psych. So what I reached, Michael, which is really extraordinary, is the cases of the people who were not insane were the most bizarre and unbelievable of all. Because what finally came to see is that or quickly came to see actually, is that what happens to them is, first of all the first premise of all the ones like that is, I'm smarter than the cops. I'm smart. That's the first premise to doom, right? And they make it based on the guy who stopped him on the freeway for speeding, right? And they have no conception of who they're going to get involved with. They get into a murder, right? So it's that, but also that when they determine to do it, Michael, they get into a fictional frame of mind where they are putting a story together. And so it is, so what you, the hardest thing to do in talking with people in that situation is to keep a straight face and to keep from laughing. I mean, you just wouldn't believe it. So that's why homicide is the weirdest phenomenon, human phenomenon of all to me.
So thank you. I'm going to try to bring it back to a few more viewers' questions here. Since we're talking about homicide and we're talking about life reviews, Choose Rescue asks, does the life review include harming animals as well as people?
Oh my God, I wonder that. I just don't know. But that's and then harming under animals under what circumstances, right? Like eating them, for example. I mean, there are just so many things, Michael. My mind is completely at a loss to, yeah, I don't know. There's so many. And if so, how many down? I mean, I don't know.
Thank you. Next question. Um, what about life prior to life on Earth and life on other planets or parallel realities? And in my experience of NDEs, I haven't heard of this where people talk about being on other planets or other realities.
Yes,
Have you
indeed.
heard of that?
Well, I I remember a couple of cases where people saw vastness that was so great that they sensed that, yeah, there's, it goes on forever. And among them these were all people who, these very lengthy cardiac arrests. And one of them was George Ritchie, who said, for example, that in this high institute of higher learning he experienced, that he said there are no words. But he said it's as though there would be one section of it which you could call a library, right? So, but he said in one section of that library were the holy books of the universe, right? Now, this idea of the possibility of reincarnation on other worlds is a Pythagorean idea. And I don't know how far it goes back in Pythagorean thinking, but one of the interesting figures of the history of astronomy, and I'm a buffo on that, is uh, Bruno, right? And um, um, Galileo got off easy, with the house arrest, but a little before that, Giordano Bruno in 1600 was burnt alive because Galileo, he did pretty bad by saying, well, it's not the earth that's the center, but the sun. And that was bad enough. And but what Bruno had to tell us was Bruno had looked all out at all those stars and all, and he said, well, each one of those stars has planets going around it. And so therefore, get this, there is no center, is kind of how we think of it now, right? And that is Bruno's thinking, right? Because there is no center if all of the different stars have planets around them, as we essentially now know. Okay, and so that was just too much, so they burned Bruno alive. Now, one of the things he had said that got him into trouble was that you reincarnate on different worlds out there. So yeah, this idea has been around for a long time, and to me, it's really exciting. You know, excuse me.
Well, it makes me wonder, and in a minute, Rue needs to go to bed, so I'm gonna make this next point or question, and then I'm gonna put Rue to bed, and we'll see you on just the screen by yourself for a second. It makes me wonder what the fabric is of this construct, because that's to me is what it
Yeah.
is. That I don't believe, if we're eternal beings, and I truly believe we are, and we've had an infinite number of lifetimes, they can't all have been just here. And yet there seems to be a veil even on the other side of the veil that keeps us seeing, or maybe it's because it's beyond our comprehension with this level or something of consciousness. There's a veil behind the veil that keeps us from seeing other worlds, other realities, other universes, or things of that sort.
Yeah. You know, the Swedenborg, he was a scientist and mining engineers. He's had a lot of spiritual visions and all. And in his spiritual visions, he zoomed out to not even past the solar system. And it's interesting to read his description of that, because he describes that out beyond the planets they knew then. He said suddenly there was this drop off in complete blackness. And what I find so interesting about that is that absolutely that does occur. It's called the Cooper Cliff. Uh, uh, it's what it happens is suddenly that the particles are so concentrated around the sun, and then at a certain point that you get out into interstellar space, that it's such a profound void. And that was, that Swedenborg had described that very effect on his trip out there. So yeah.
It's interesting. I'm a open water swimmer, and I'm certainly not a deep sea, what do we call them, a free diver. But if I swim down far enough, all of a sudden it goes from buoyancy, because there's so much there, to you hit a void. It's about 30, 35 feet down, depending on the salinity of the water. And all of a sudden you fall like a stone because there's nothing there.
Oh my goodness.
So you hit that void.
Yeah.
That void is interesting because Mary Fryer was asking a question. She said her near-death experience was beautiful and silent, without words.
Yeah.
And she wonders if that's how a lot of the experiences are, that they're coming to you or without words, without a booming voice, or just with something beautiful in the silence.
Yeah, people generally say that it's thoughts that come to them. It's not, even when, for example, they're hovering above their bodies and the doctors and nurses are going through the resuscitation, they say it's not like an auditory experience, like it's that you don't hear the doctors and nurses' voices, but that you become aware of what they're thinking. And as one woman who's a nurse told me, whenever she had her near-death experience, and she was a nurse herself, and she said she was up above the nurse and the doctor, and she said that she would understand what the doctor and nurse thought just the moment before she would see them open their mouths to say it. So it was the thought that she was getting.
Can we thank you? Can we have, and this is a question from Amy D, can we have the same experience of people who've had an NDE, yet without having the NDE?
Say that again. Oh,
can
I see.
We have the same?
Yeah. Yes. All of the effects of or what was it? All of the symptoms or parts of the near-death experience as we know it are also commonly experienced by people who are not ill or injured themselves, but who they are there in the company of a loved one or a friend or even a patient who's dying. And For example, when a family, for example, is gathered around a person who's dying, that as the person in the bed passes away, the bystanders may say that they, very common thing, they see the spirit of the dying person leave in the form of a cloud or a golden globe, kind of. Or the bystanders may say that I myself got out of my body and I went up toward this light with grandma. And and people say the room fills with light. Sometimes the bystanders say they see the spirits of the dying loved ones, relatives and friends come to as to escort them away. And most remarkably, Michael, have quite a number of cases where the bystanders empathically co-live the dying life review of the person who's passing away. To me, it's a horror because I'm hoping to recuse myself from my own life review anyway, much less the idea like it might be a bystander there, right? But but it happens.
So going from the shared death experience to recusing yourself, and this is a question by Jorge and several others here. It is there a purgatory, or is there some sort of punishment on the other side? And I will add to that, have you heard stories from people who attempted and didn't succeed in suicide?
Yeah, okay. All right, good. Well, I don't know about purgatory per se. I've read a academic book from Yale or I think Chicago Press, I think, but it was a complicated academic book about purgatory, but I still can't say that I really have a clear idea of what purgatory is or all the details and all. But what I have heard from people with near-death experiences that maybe resonates with the idea of purgatory to some degree, but also resonates with ancient Greek literature, including the Odyssey of Homer. And let me explain. In these cases where people say if the cardiac arrest goes on beyond 5 minutes, the brain is hopelessly dead. I don't know exactly where those numbers come from, but as a clinical rule, that's very good, to keep in mind when you're doing resuscitations. However, also unquestionably, in some remarkable circumstances, that it happens that just doesn't happen. For example, there was a case in the New York Times some years ago of a 3-year-old girl who survived being underneath the water for 66 minutes. And they were talking about the water was very cold. And they were talking about the diving reflex. If you put very cold water in your face, the blood shunts to the brain, preferably. So, but who knows? I mean, she was fine, but she was under the water so what I'm getting at is that there's all these extraordinary exceptions we just don't understand. But sometimes people go, I had a good friend who the doctor told me that she was dead for 40 minutes. I won't go into why he, despite all this, decided to try to resuscitate. There's a story in itself, but basically that 5-minute rule, let's watch it when we're doing resuscitations, but and these extraordinary things they happen and under a number of those I've talked with over the years say that from this perspective they're in out of their body, they become aware of this zone that seems to be kind of projected over this one, we're in, for want of a better term. And they say they become aware of people in that zone who, for want of a better term, seem stuck, that they are repeating some action of this life in this kind of stuck way. Now, it sounds just gosh awfully horrible. But number one, I would point out that that is in the Odyssey, which when I was a kid, we all read, was at a certain age. But in that story of the underworld, there's the scenes, for example, of Sisyphus rolling the stone up endlessly, and then at the top it rolls back down, or the the water carriers filling up the water jugs, but they have leaks. So by the time they get to the place, they're all, and that theme of the internal repetition and eternal frustration. Well, I've heard that same thing from people who never read the Odyssey, and see into that there. It's like that they George Ritchie described that by saying they can't progress on the other side because their God's still living here. And this woman, Vi, I was mentioning before, who was for 40 minutes, she said she saw, for example, a house, and she didn't know who these people were, but she said it appeared to be a grandmother and two teenage children. These were living people, but and amongst them was this other woman who seemed to be trying to get through to them, but was, frustrated. These are just very, very similar descriptions. And so what does that mean? I don't know. Is that purgatory? By the way, the same people who are telling me these things say don't get feeling it's hopeless, because these same people say it's like these other people in and out among them, like enlightened people, are trying to say, hey, wake up, snap out of it. And so that's kind of like, I'm thinking maybe I figured it's like maybe when they got out of their bodies on the wrong side or something, right? But it's not a hopeless thing. And
Last question yeah.
That's that. Gotcha.
Last question I have from the audience, and then I want to know where people can go to find out more, is if somebody, it's really a karma question, and there's several about it. If you've done something horrific here, are you coming back like as an inchworm? Well, in Eben Alexander, there was the Dr. Eben Alexander proof of heaven. There's the worm's eye existence of the world. Are you coming back as an insect? Are you coming back with a worm's eye view? Are you coming back? Are you stuck coming back time and time again until something takes place to make amends for this existence? Or since we're getting this life review all out of love, is that enough?
Okay. I haven't talked to any of the great villains of history. All right. Everybody I know that, has, like I said, been within parameters that I guess most of us kind of appreciate. So I don't know the big issue. However, just within my limited microscopic life, I've had some awareness of that effect, and why that is not punishment at all, but education. And let me explain. Go back decades and decades ago. I treated someone very badly for quite a period of time because my ego had been so bruised and I felt so justified. Okay. Now, that's over. Flash forward years and years and years. And I find myself magically in exactly that same position, except now I am the recipient. And my my tormentor was just about 10 times as good at it as I had been, which was, and I
I'm going to
saw me.
listen to you. We're going to go on to full screen. Rue has asked to go to bed, so I'm going to listen and everybody else is listening, but I'll
Perfect.
disappear off camera for a second for Rue to go. So please continue.
Yes, indeed. So I immediately realized that the reason for the 10-time magnification was to get your attention, right? So during this entire interlude, I kept saying, thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Because it was education. It was, it's like that was nothing to do with punishment. But you think about it, it's like eh, how are you going to understand the what you've done and the significance of it unless you experience that same thing, that what you've inflicted. The only education solution is to let you experience it yourself, right? It's
Mhm.
not um it's not punishment, it's education. Now I gotta say something. In Charlottesville, Michael, in about 1967 or 68, I was a graduate student in philosophy. Okay, and so uh, a Broadway musical play came through Charlottesville on the touring road company, right, for one night, and I don't even remember which one it was, but because my dear friend was the guy who got the entertainment for the university, we had like front row seats, okay, and this was just a great musical play, Broadway musical. So, like I said, I don't remember which one it was, but sitting there, this play had a really terrific comic villain. I mean, he had a black high top hat, this, black cape, and he was just, just oozed meanness in the way he treated people. Okay, so now the play takes place. The end, gets to the end. The curtain goes down. Then it's the curtain call, and out come the hero and heroine, and there's a great, roar coming up, from the audience. And then the supporting actors and actresses, and they come out swooping out, in a great way. But again, yeah. And then from backstage comes out the villain. And he's in the spotlight. And since I'm sitting in the first row, silence. I mean, just a palpable silence falls over the audience, right? And then, since I'm sitting on the front row, you hear it was astonishing. Just about the same instant, it's like you heard a whole bunch of people at once go, like, like gasping at once, like this, oh, they gasp, and then you hear a couple of, and then it gets louder, and then it's louder, and then everything, like he got the loudest applause of all, right? And that is a certain lesson for life in a way. And, it's like still some of the villains in my life, I still resent them. I still hold on to it. At a certain point, it becomes kind of pleasurable in a way to hold on to these things. But, but, so I'm not, there to where I need to be yet. But, you do see that loosening. And so a number of cases in my life where I think back to the villains now, I think, wow, right on, what a great lesson. Thank you. right? And
What a great
so,
story of life.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So Raymond, where can people go to find out more and to find your beautiful work?
Well, I am very happy about my new book from Simon and
Yeah.
Schuster coming out, which is called Proof of Life After Life with Paul Perry. And I'm just really happy to see this because I see such a big midlife group now coming up who's there's a need for this, especially after the COVID. So we've assembled a lot of information, and I'm available at life www.lifeafterlife.com, and I'm there's all kinds of information on there. I myself, I'm not good at the internet. My last computer broke a few weeks ago. The crank came off. I looked in there and it had Thomas Edison's trademark right there. So I'm not good at those things, but we can get those, inquiries are replied to. And I'm just so grateful that people would listen in. This stuff is so fascinating to me. And I'm just honored that people would, listen in and, you know, ask questions.
Well, this has been beautiful, Raymond. I want to thank everybody in the audience here, and certainly Bhavik, who's helping run this, and I and Ann and our whole dream team here. Are there
And I
any
want to thank
last?
my dear friend
Yeah.
Jeremy over here for,
Oh, Jeremy,
operating
thank you for
these
helping set
machines.
everything up.
Yeah, just thank you, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And
Are there any last words you want to share with people based on that? The analogies just came to me that you have been gifted with the opportunity to look at the world through a unique pinhole through other people's stories and journeys. Is there any last words you want to share with people?
well, just again, thank you for listening. I just I'm honored that people respect my views on these things. I like to say I'm an expert on the unknown and a specialist in guesswork. But I have talked think about these things for a long time. So, to my great surprise, now I'm confident there's an afterlife. Again, that's not anything I want to try to persuade anybody else of. People have to go through their own process, but I give up. I can't think my way out of
I love it. And I couldn't agree more. So I want to thank you so much for being here tonight, Raymond. Thank you for your work. There's so many
it. Thank you,
people
man.
here who are saying, I have your book. I followed you. You've been such an influence in my life. You have touched so many people and have helped steer so many people and open up people's minds to a possibility because of your unique I'm going to call it your unique upbringing and your investigator PD mindset. You have helped people to be open to, I think, what we are hearing more and more as consciousness is shifting during this time. And I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you, man. I just think we're in for some really fascinating times, and I know you worry about your little one there. So mine are not so little anymore. This youngest being 24 and 22, but I'm worried about them. And yeah, just
So thank you again.
thank you.
Big hugs and love, Raymond. Big hugs and
That
love.
goes right back to you, friend. I'll see you again. I hope.
Absolutely. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, check out Life After Life, and begin diving into, a greater story of possibilities about your existence today, and above and beyond all else, shine bright. Woohoo!
Hooray.
Thank you so much, Raymond. And a last note for everybody, if you're looking for a daily uplift, a daily attunement of energy, go to dailywoohoo.com. where we share information of this sort and we help bring your energy up each and every day, because this is not just an energy game, but I believe Raymond would agree, the mission is love.
Yeah.
So lots of love, everybody. Lots of love, Raymond, and have a
Bye-bye.
beautiful
You
evening.
too.
Shine bright.
Hope I'll see you again.
I arrived at Dr. Raymond Moody's house in deep South Alabama. Raymond, how's it going? Hey man,
How you been?
good. I'm here to talk to you about the afterlife.
Okay, well, that's my favorite subject.
Okay, let's do
go
it.
talk about it.
In the early 70s, Dr. Moody, then a philosophy professor trained at the University of Virginia, began to explore the stories of people who had almost died and crossed the line into a heavenly realm. These stories have been told throughout human history, but Dr. Moody was the first to dissect them and discover their similarities. He called them near-death experiences. When he wrote about these in a book, Life After Life, the field of near-death studies began. I have written 4 books with Raymond. I even helped him move into his home here in rural Alabama, so I felt very comfortable interviewing him in his living room. But even as well as I know Raymond, I was surprised by some of his answers. You've had your own near-death experience. And based on those two things, the fact that you've heard all of these stories and you have your own story to tell, what do you think happens when we die?
What I think happens when we die is that we enter into another state of existence or another state of consciousness that is so extraordinarily different from the spatial and temporal frame of reality in which we exist in the physical world, that the language we have is not yet adequate to describe this other state of existence or consciousness.
When we leave our mortal body, how do we leave it? What do we look like?
People say that in the realm of existence they enter into upon the point of death, that there's no such thing as physicality as we experience in it in this realm. It's not that they have a physical body. It's rather that they have some other sort of vehicle which they find it very difficult to describe, but that it does have a form, that it carries a personality, but that it's just entirely impossible to describe it in terms of or analogously to the kind of body that we have. I've heard it characterized as a spiritual body, for example. That's a term that I hear from a lot of people.
So when they come back, they're changed, they're transformed.
There are a number of transformations we see with people who come back from near-death experiences. The most prominent one is that whatever they had been chasing before, whether knowledge or fame or power or money or any of these other things, that when they come back, they say that the most important thing we can do while we're alive is to learn how to love.
How has this knowledge affected your life?
The most powerful one to me has been that it really has convinced me of the importance of love. And I try in every day to be loving to people. I genuinely do try in my day-to-day interactions with people that I try to keep in mind that I will be seeing this again and that I will be seeing this event not from the way I'm seeing it now through these eyes, but that I will be seeing this event through the eyes of the people with whom I've interacted.
How do you think the world would change if you were able to prove that there was an afterlife?
Many people get to thinking about this and they think, oh, if that were the case, then we'd all love each other and there would be nirvana and there wouldn't be any problems in the world. But I don't think it would bring people to a state of complete love and make everybody saints and so on. I honestly don't accept that. But there is one thing that I am absolutely sure that a rational proof of life after death would do. And that would be that it would fundamentally alter the structure of the human mind. If we could have a rational proof of life after death, then human beings would never again be the same, because the entire structure of our cognitive mind would be expanded. What I can honestly tell you from the bottom of my heart is that I accept that there is a God, and I have a relationship with God, and I talk with Him all the time. What I honestly don't know yet, from the rational point of view, is whether life after death is in His plan or not. And it may well be, if you think about it, that God has something in mind for us that is even more remarkable than what we might call a life after death. In other words, I love God, have a trusting relationship with God. He hasn't told me anything yet about an afterlife. I'm just going to have to wait and see.
Every day there's a new horizon. Birds keep on singing, earth keeps on spinning. Time to toss any fears that rule you. Dance to vibrations, no limitations.